I do, yes.
Cool. So we are live. I'm here with Rob. Rob, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I got my fancy new shirt that I bought from your merch store there online.
It
I don't always
looks
do
great.
I don't always do that, but I like the keys for St. Peter. I'm assuming that's what it is. Yeah.
Yep, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So amazing to meet you. It was amazing meeting your partner in crime there, Anthony. And I, you know,
He's quite the guy, that's for sure.
yeah, he's got a lot of personality, a lot to say, and I said
Hmm.
I want to hear the other side of the story. I want to hear what Rob has to say. So that's why you're here today. But no,
Okay.
in all seriousness, you were both going to come on at once, and then I think you had to travel or some work thing or something like that, so you weren't able to do it. So I did one on one, which is better for me anyway.
My my wife actually went it. We thought she was in labor. Had to drive down to the hospital and try to confirm labor, and ended up not being labor. So that's why I couldn't come on that night.
Oh, oh wow. Oh, okay. False alarm.
Yep.
So,
It,
is she late? A bit late with the baby? Is the baby a little bit late now?
no, no. The due date is next Thursday, so we're at 39 weeks right now.
Okay,
So not late by any means,
okay.
but definitely could come anytime.
Yeah, yeah. So feel free to jump off the call if if something happens. But so the way I do my podcast, I like the guests to go back in time and talk about your childhood, talk about your earliest recollections, even
Hmm.
before the age of reason. Just impressions of God and religion, the church. If you were raised Catholic, just fill us in. I'm sure your listeners already
Yeah.
know the story, or maybe they don't, but just fill us in a little bit, the timeline all the way up till today.
Okay. So I am a cradle Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Honestly, some of my earliest memories of the faith are we would go camping a lot as a family, and my grandparents would always come, and they were very faithful Catholics. And some of my earliest memories and some of my best memories are laying with them in our camper in the early morning, praying the rosary with them. So, anytime they prayed the rosary daily, and any day I was with them, whether camping or staying over at their house, we always prayed the rosary together. So those are some of my best memories, some of my earliest memories of the faith. Um, Growing up, I grew up in a pretty I'm realizing now it was a pretty traditional parish. It was a parish that had both the Novus Ordo and the TLM, and this was back in the. I grew up in the '90s, so this was before Benedict and Summorum Pontificorum. Um, but my family went to the Novus Ordo side of the parish, but the catechesis and the upbringing was still very traditional. We had a youth group growing up called the Fatima Cadets, where all of us young kids in the parish would do the first Saturday devotions, May through October. We'd have confession before Mass, pray the rosary before Mass, have Mass, and then after Mass, we would gather together, learn something about Fatima while we made rosaries to bring to a nursing home or hospital or something like that. Um, I was an altar server growing up. Those are some of my best memories too, just serving Mass. Um, so yeah, I grew up very Catholic, um, and then went to college and realized it was just easier to live like everyone else, unfortunately. So I would never say I was never not Catholic. I was just a very bad Catholic for about a decade, starting, about age 18 or 19 in college. Um, it was always one of those things where the faith was always very intellectual for me. So I always believed it. Was just always also a big procrastinator. So, it's like, oh, I'll go to confession next week. And before then, why don't I do all this other stuff? If I'm going to confession anyways, and then next week it was, well, I'll push it off another week. And, next thing you know, weeks became months and months became years. And it took, and, ending up having our first child to really bring me back. In the meantime, I got married. My wife was raised Baptist. But like I said, I wasn't really Catholic at the time. Once or twice a year, I would go to confession, get myself to Mass. And one of those times ended up being an Easter Vigil Mass. It was my wife's first time ever attending any sort of Catholic liturgy. And she fell in love with it. She knew that that if we were going to practice a faith, she wanted it to be the Catholic faith. But that was still a few years before we got married, and that our marriage was a few years before we had our first kid. But when we were pregnant with our first, at one point it just really hit me, like, not only am I now responsible for my own soul, which, in your 20s, as a guy, you just kind of feel invincible, right? It's stupid and it's irrational, but death is something that's way far off, and it's something for you to worry about later. But now it's like, well, now I'm responsible for my wife's soul, but also now I'm going to be responsible for the soul of a child. And you just realize, like I, when it's just yourself, you can maybe flirt with death or hell a little, right? But when it's someone else, you don't have that luxury. And so I started going, I got to confession, started going back to Mass. My wife enrolled in RCIA. We had our child, Matthias. He was baptized March of 2017. My wife came into the church Easter Vigil in April of that year. And so that was, that was 2019. So that was about 4 years ago. So I've been back in the church now for 4 years.
Wow, you're like a baby in the church. But, I'm embarrassed because I came in 2009 after 25 years of atheism. And like for the first 10 years, I was like in the pink cloud where it was just like consolation. And then the pandemic, which shall not be named, struck. And then my faith went down the toilet. Not my faith, but my practice, because they shut a lot of the churches and stuff like that. And it's been a rough time. So I'm trying to build back better. So I don't know where you stand on all that, and I don't want to talk about it, but
fair enough,
because I'll lose my YouTube channel again.
Yep.
But you got some fans in my live chat. I don't have a lot of viewers on my channel, but we've got Mrs. Homemaker, aka Samantha. Who is that? She's one of your fans.
She's someone who's been watching our channel for, I'm not sure how long now, at least 6 months or so.
So it's not your wife. I was thinking maybe it's your wife.
No, my wife is trying to get the kids to bed right now. So
she's not watching your live stream while you're in the other room. So
no, not anymore.
That would be very postmodern of her. But yes, we have. I don't know how to say it. Hallelujah or hallelujah. You must know her.
Yeah, we call her Hallelujah. She's
regular.
Oh man, she's all over Catholic YouTube. She's a mod for a ton of different channels.
Cool.
So yeah.
Cool. Hey, Hallelujah, you want to mod my channel? Just kidding. I don't need moderators. I don't have much traffic. But nice to see you. She says, "Hey, Rob. So you're getting a lot of love here. So you're like the quiet guy, but usually they're the ones who are they have a lot of secret admirers, right? The quiet one."
I don't know. Well, compared to Anthony, I'm definitely quiet. I mean, there's no over talking Anthony, but
well, plus you're busy with all the tech stuff, right? Like I saw you were managing all kinds of stuff while he's blabbing there. So I want you to talk us through a little bit. Well, first of all, do you have any siblings? Are you comfortable talking a little bit about your siblings?
Yeah. So I have one younger brother that I grew up with. He's 3.5 years younger than me. So we had, really similar upbringing, obviously, same parents and grandparents, all that. He was never quite as into the faith growing up as I was. He was an altar server too, but he just wasn't as enthusiastic about it. But he's been away from the church, so he's 30, 31 now. He's been away, since 18, 19 as well too. So I hope he comes back. Pray for him to come back, and I'm sure he will one day. So I do have two older half sisters that I don't know all that well, did not grow up with. But yeah, so those are my siblings.
And are both of you folks still alive?
No, my dad passed away. Matter of fact, we buried him a year ago on Wednesday. So he passed away last year. He had MS.
Okay.
He was diagnosed with that before I was born. So
Yeah.
so he had that my whole life. But
okay.
my mom's still around, and
Okay.
she loves her grandkids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very cool. So, you did mention the wild years in your late teens there, and putting off confession and these sorts of things. Confession, it's a great remedy against falling into deeper, more grave sins. So the devil likes to keep us out of the confession box, and I like to go frequently. Can you talk us through my listeners? Like, I don't have that many listeners, but I'm always trying to get my Catholic guests, to talk about the experience of walking in with dread and fear and guilt and shame, and then walking out and hearing the angels sing, and you're flying and floating on a cloud. It's not about the emotions, it's not about the feeling, it's not. But
right.
I want people to understand that it's real, the absolution is real, and it's Jesus Christ in that box. If you still do it in a box, which I prefer to do it in the box, not just sitting in the views. Talk us through one of your most dramatic ones, if you would, if you're comfortable with it.
It's one of those things where, like I said, the faith tends to be very intellectual for me, to the point where I have to continuously remind myself that it's not something that's just there for intellectual study, right? It's something that's there to live, and you are supposed to build a relationship, with Christ. So I've never had a huge emotional experience necessarily after confession. But definitely beforehand, especially when I was away from the church, the thing that kept me away from confession was, like you said, it was the shame, it was the guilt, right? I've always had a somewhat of a passionist spirituality, the meditating on the passion and the stations of the cross, sorrowful mysteries. That's always what I felt most connected to. So just the knowledge that, my sins are what caused Christ that pain and that torment. It always made it, even to this day, it makes me feel a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And that can really make it hard to get yourself into the confessional and admit how you've hurt yourself, of course, spiritually, sometimes physically, how you've hurt others, how you've hurt the whole body of Christ, really. But when you go in there and you are open and you just lay it all out there, especially when you start, Father, forgive me for I've sinned. It has been, there's times where it's been 2 or 3 years at different points. And then you just lay out everything you've done wrong, and you feel that shame and guilt and even fear beforehand. But no matter what you say, at the end, you still hear those words that Father says, when he says, I absolve you of your sins. And sometimes that does just hit you, it feels like love. It feels like when you're a kid and you've done something wrong and you've tried to hide it from your parents and they find out, but yet they still give you a hug and tell you they love you. That's there are times that's what it feels like. And those are, that is one of those things that helps you keep coming back to the confessional.
Amazing. We're really spoiled, and I really like it. It warms the cockles of my heart, whatever that means. I'm not sure if you're if you're into research, you can find the origin of that expression for me. But warms the cockles of my heart when I see a lineup at the confessional, because it's rare here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where I am.
Yeah.
It's rare. What about where
Yeah.
you're at?
So I live in kind of a rural
Okay.
area of northern Minnesota. Um, and it's been getting better, but you know, it's the parish nearby was one of those parishes where it's like you have half an hour of confession on a Saturday afternoon. Um, and generally it was empty, you know, and that's sad when you see how many people go up to communion, and not to judge. I'm not saying necessarily that anyone had mortal sin on their soul, but the two don't seem to add up, right? Like it seems to be a little incongruous when you don't see nearly that many people in confession. But you know, there was one time I was at an FSSP parish down in the Minneapolis area, and we were there 45 minutes early, and there was a line for confession there 45 minutes early, and that line did not finish until 45 minutes through mass. I mean, they probably heard 150 confessions, and I just love seeing that so much.
Amazing. Wow. There's another experience I want to share with you at my one of
Mm-hmm.
my favorite chapels here. It's a huge uh, um, chapel that was built by a saint. Actually, I don't know if you've heard of Saint Brother Andre
Andre Basset.
Basset. Yeah, you know about him?
Yeah, I learned about him first in the Consecration of Saint Joseph by Father Calloway.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. So you know a little bit of the story. He built it for Saint Joseph and real devotion to Saint Joseph, and he was a humble little porter, you know, at the seminary across the street, and just a wonderful
Mm-hmm.
story, very wonderful story. He really touches my heart. I have a devotion to Saint Brother Andre, but the point of my story is that at the Saint Joseph's Oratory, there are all kinds of people there: Muslims, Hindus, you know, all kinds of Christians, whatever, and
Yep.
atheists, and it really touches me when I see all kinds of different people lining up to touch the life-size or larger than life-size crucifix, and they just
Mm,
reach up and touch the feet and say a prayer, do the sign of the cross, whatever they do.
yep.
It's just done in silence, and I could just watch that for hours. I just sit there and I watch, because people have an intimate moment, wordless, and sometimes they'll raise a baby child to touch the feet of Jesus, you know, and these are wounded feet, and the wounded feet are also rubbed free of the paint, so the paint's gone because of all the
Right.
touching. And I mean, my non-Catholic and non-Orthodox Christian friends will think that this is some sort of sick pagan
Hmm.
pagan thing, idolatry,
Right.
right? Right.
Idolatry. Yeah.
But it's not. It's not. It's not. Can you explain? Can you explain to my so-called, what, just for lack of a better term, Protestant brothers and sisters? I love them, and
Yep.
I've got a good friend in the chat here, Bread of Life, Rebecca. Um, I'm not saying that she would think it's necessarily idolatry, but I know a lot of non-Catholic Christians would think it's idolatry. Can you sort of put into words what I'm feeling when I see people showing devotion to what is just, you know, clay and paint and wood?
Well, you know, we know that. Well, number one, we're obviously not worshiping that physical item itself. We're not giving adoration to that. It's a stand-in, obviously, for it represents Jesus, and we're giving our worship, our adoration to Jesus, to God, to the Holy Trinity through that physical item. In we obviously we hear in the Ten Commandments not to not to make idols, but at the same time we know that God Himself is not opposed to using physical representations for Him, because He became incarnate. He became the God man. He took physical form. So therefore, we know physical representations of God cannot, in themselves, be inherently evil, right? Obviously, if you were to worship a cross, thinking that crucifix is God, that would be then true idolatry. But we know that it's just a physical representation of God. So, but yeah, seeing, one of my favorite devotions is the veneration of the cross on Good Friday. There's just something so powerful about processing up and kissing the feet of the cross. I've always loved that.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking, as I'm thinking about the devotions and the physicality of it, I think about, it's sad to say, it is true. It's a part of our reality in this sick, fallen world that there are children that are abducted, kidnapped, and, snuff movies are made, tortured, killed,
Yeah.
raped, whatever. Okay, that's reality. It's very dark. But that is a reality. And I think about one of those children, if they had just a little image of their father or their mother, their sister, their brother, whatever, the love and affection
Hmm.
they would show to that little tattered photograph that they carry secretly with them as they're being trafficked, worldwide or whatever. Um, no one is heartless enough to look at that child and say, no, that's just a photograph. It's just a piece of paper with molecules, ink molecules, and this sort of thing. You're not going to explain anything helpful to this child. The child loves their family, they miss their family, and they're in dire straits. And here below in the sick fallen world, we are all wounded by sin, our own actual sin
Hmm.
and original sin, and the actual sin of others too. So we're wounded, and we want heaven. And heaven is God. So we're craving that goodness. And I think it was Saint Basil, if I'm not mistaken, Saint Basil the Great, who said that everyone craves the good, therefore everyone craves God. Right. So that's basically the situation we find ourselves in this fallen world, because we're not in heaven, but we crave
Right.
heaven. We crave heaven. So
We're made for it.
we're made for heaven. Yeah, our hearts are restless until they rest in God, right? So,
Hmm.
what was your intellectual, landscape like in terms of reading, and like because we just brought to mind a couple of saints. Saint Augustine is one of my top favorites in terms of reading.
Hmm.
Can you sort of talk me through some of the highlights of like your journey intellectually reading, studying the philosophical side, the theological side, just the lives of the saints? Saint John Vianney, for example, is one that I really love, even though he didn't really write or whatever. But we all have our favorites.
Yeah.
So what's sort of the landscape like for you? Is it more the mystics? Because I know you're a passionist. You have a thing for the passionists. That was Saint John of the Cross, was it, or Saint John of Avila, or who was that?
Saint John of the Cross.
Okay.
Yep. So my favorite devotional work, anyways, is definitely the School of Jesus Crucified
Okay.
by Father Ignatius of the Side of Jesus. It's basically 31 days of meditations on the Passion,
Okay.
um, and I love doing that for Lent. It doesn't get you all the way through Lent because it is only 31 days, but it's good to either start or finish Lent with those. So that is one of my favorite devotional works. Growing up in the parish I grew up in, we used the Baltimore Catechism, so
Ah,
I've always loved referring to that just
yeah,
for quick, easy explanations for either
yeah,
myself or to give others.
yeah,
But coming back into the faith, especially learning more about the traditional side of the faith, I've come to love the Roman Catechism, but also I started to dive more into St. Thomas, just because being someone who kind of likes more of that intellectual challenge that the faith can provide. St. Thomas, I mean, there's no better role model for that than St. Thomas, and he touches on almost any and every subject you can think of. Um, but I've also started to get into more of just, like you said, kind of more of the philosophical basis laid down by Aristotle and other earlier philosophers that really, when you study like Aristotle or Plato, you can see then how it impacted like Saint John when he writes about Jesus being the Logos, and you see kind of that intellectual underpinning of the faith that's been there since the time of Christ. So
Yeah, it's amazing. I I I am moved to tears when I read about the death of Socrates. I am moved to tears by his love of truth, and his wit, his charm, and everything. He really does move me. And I know that's the writing of Plato, but I also love Plato a lot. And there are flaws. Obviously, there's some flaws in his philosophy, but there's a lot that's been refined through Aristotle and through Thomas Aquinas and all this sort of thing. What about since we're touching on Aquinas? I always like to sort of use some counterpoint and bring in one of my heroes, which is Blessed John Duns Scotus.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you read about him?
I know a little bit about him. And he's him and Saint Bonaventure.
Yeah.
They're really like the other side
Platonic,
of the coin.
the really Platonic side, which I love. Yeah.
Right. I haven't dug into that
It's tough.
style of
it's tough stuff.
of philosophy as much.
Yeah. It's rough. It's
But-
a bit rough.
I'm by no means like a dogmatic Dominican or Thomist, in that sense.
Militant Thomas.
think- Right.
Do you
Yeah.
know him? Do you know him?
Not personally. I know of him, but
I interviewed him. Nice guy, but he's very militantly Thomistic.
well, it's accurate then, I guess.
Yeah. Do you know Byzantine Scotist?
I don't. Once again, I've never talked to
Gideon
him
Lazar?
personally, but
Gideon Lazar?
yeah, Gideon. I've watched a lot of his stuff, but
Cool kid, yeah. Bright young man, and Jew. He was a Jew.
Yep.
So
If you like Scotus and Bonaventure, you might want to talk to Paleocrat
Oh.
Jeremiah Bannister.
Oh yeah. I interviewed
he
him
loves-
once. I interviewed him once, but he was just talking about unfortunately, his loss with his daughter and all that. So he was just
Right.
gushing about that for an hour. But yeah, I'll invite him back. Yeah, I'll definitely invite him back. But are you a young Earth creationist as I am?
Yes. Well, I'm definitely a creationist. The young Earth part, I definitely lean more that way.
Okay.
Especially as far as from the creation of Adam and Eve to now.
Yeah.
I hold to the biblical timeline for that.
Okay.
As far as the 6 days of creation, I think it's more than likely it was 6 literal days, but there may or may not be some wiggle room there.
Yeah, but you don't insert a bunch of disease and death before the creation of Adam and Eve.
No.
That's all that matters. That's all that matters. I don't care about the rest. That's the main
Right.
thing. Is it's like
Yeah.
there's a dogma that God created a good world, right? So to me, that's like kind of a deal breaker. If you're gonna say God created a crappy world, I'm not gonna buy that. Like, sorry, sorry. So that's exciting. That's cool. So what is it? I find a lot of pushback. I get a lot of pushback from Catholics, particularly. They say, "Oh, that's a Protestant thing." And one of my recent guests, he said that it's a Protestant thing. Why are you, buying into this young Earth creationism? For lack of a better term, because it's sort of a stupid term, and it's kind of embarrassing to have to use that term. But it's just for me, it's just the traditional Christian understanding of
Right.
creation, right? But I get a lot of pushback, and people think you're stupid or uneducated or whatever. And I studied science. I've published one paper in quantum physics, so I know a little bit about science. But and I've worked at the Canadian Space Agency. So I've got some experience in the hard sciences. Okay, but the problem in today's world is that Satan has fooled a lot of us into doing away with these Aristotelian categories. For example, final causality and formal causality and these sorts of things, right? So we're left with a basic materialistic, naturalistic worldview by default, even if you're Christian. And that to me just seems like almost inexcusable, So what do you say about this whole naturalism thing and the sort of pseudo-atheism? And we even hear about Christians becoming atheist, and they sort of talk themselves out of Christianity. We hear about this in our modern age. So what do you think's happening there?
Obviously the church premises that one technically can hold to, to some of the theories that are out there. But I think when you start to chip away at, like you said, at the traditional, Christian worldview, when you start to question, say, the first chapters of Genesis as being literal, you're chipping away at the very foundations of everything else that you claim to hold true, right? Like, when you start to chip away at something like that, what's to stop you from going further? And I think people have to realize that the things that so-called scientists are claiming as scientific dogma, that there's not enough evidence or proof to make those sort of claims for those theories. And most people aren't even aware of the evidence that's out there that those theories can't address, and never do address. You know, these theories tend to just completely ignore any evidence that opposes them. But we know real science, it doesn't do that. It can't do that, because real science is supposed to be observations of reality. Well, if you take something that you have observed in reality and just ignore it because it doesn't quite fit in with the worldview you want, then that's not science, it's ideology.
Absolutely. That's why we call it scientism, right? This new this new sort of movement. It really is sad, but and again, I'm like you said earlier, I'm not judging anyone's intellect or anyone's heart or whatever. But I guess what I was driving at, I was hoping you would
Mm-hmm.
address is sort of the spiritual battle and Satan and his demons. How
Mm.
Satan is the prince of this world. You didn't really go there, but I'll sort of tell you explicitly that that's where I want you to go with this now.
Okay.
Okay, what's happening with the spiritual battle? I mean, when we see the LGBTQ stuff and all the perversion, sexual liberty license, and we see, just a total disregard for logic and meaning and value.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just talk a little bit about the dark side with the spiritual battle.
Well, you're right. When you hold to a naturalist or a materialist worldview, when you ignore parts of objective reality, you end up it ends up going really wrong. I mean, Our Lady warned us about the errors of Russia at Fatima,
Yeah,
and I think many people misunderstand what those errors are. They think it means
communism.
economic communism,
Yeah,
which assuredly there's some truth to that. But at the same time, uh, that's not really at the heart of, like, Marxism. At the heart of Marxism is materialism, and is voluntarism. It's the will to power. Just do to your will, and not due to anything outside of yourself or anything outside of what you can hold or feel. And I think that's what Our Lady was warning about, is that um, warning us of the dangers of ignoring objective reality and just making reality, whatever it is you want it to be. That's what I see as the errors of Russia.
yeah. I was like I said, I was atheist for 25 years, from ages 14 when I lost my faith, my Protestant faith, up until 39. And
Okay.
it was philosophy that ostensibly it was philosophy that brought me back. It was really, God chasing me down, and he put a love of truth in me. So but I was deep into the New Age. I was a pantheist. I was, as Chesterton said, the danger of being an atheist is not that you'll believe nothing, it's that you'll believe absolutely anything and everything.
Anything, yeah,
you know
exactly.
so that I lived that as an atheist, because it's just a smorgasbord. Oh, what does this guy say? What does that guy say? What's this book, this philosophy, whatever? Rabbit hole, rabbit hole, rabbit hole, rabbit hole. And our
Hmm.
hearts are restless until they repose in God. So I went down the German idealism route. I ended up being a hard solipsist. It's just like crazy to be unmoored from the source of everything that is. But the New Age is a very interesting thing. It really does come from Gnosticism, and we
Yeah.
hear Saint Augustine fighting against those ideas with Manichaeus or whatever his name was, and
Hmm.
he's got some really good rebuttals for that, obviously. But the New Age is very fascinating because there's this idea that the spirit is good. We're just ghosts in this machine, and all these sorts of things. They're very subtle ideas, and they're very
Yeah.
flexible, and you can adapt it to your lifestyle. Mix in a bit of Buddhism, get this and that, and it's cute, it's attractive, and you could just make your own thing. So
Hmm.
it's a very powerful weapon, I would say, for the dark side.
When you converted, especially from that, did you find the rosary to be a great help? Because we know that Saint Dominic was given the rosary to combat the Albigensians, which that was
Gnostic.
the New Age, the New Age Gnosticism of the 11th century.
Yeah, I've been doing the rosary since my conversion. I'm not always 100% consistent. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll make a public confession.
I think most of us can probably say that from time to time.
But I do console myself. I do console myself because I belong to the confraternity of the Rosary. I don't know if you belong to that
Hmm.
officially or not, but
I don't know, not officially.
you should. The
I
membership
should
has
have.
a lot of benefits. Okay, one of the benefits I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you to salve my conscience is that it's like a group thing. So, like, if you're not carrying your weight today or this week or this month or this year or this decade, the group is there. Okay, and so you can think about it this way: like, are you contributing? Are you pulling your weight? And to be
Hmm.
a member in good standing, there's no sin involved whatsoever if you slack off. Okay, there's no
Right.
sin, but if you want to be a member in good standing, you just need to complete a full rosary, meaning just the 15 mysteries or whatever it is,
Yep.
once a week. That's not much. So
Okay.
even if you do, patchy one today, patchy one tomorrow, you add it all up, it's more than one rosary, right?
Right.
So I don't want to make excuses. I don't want to like tell people like, hey, you can cheat and get away with it if you belong to the confraternity, but you kind of can. That's my life hack. That's a life hack for you.
Catholic life
it
hacks. Yeah.
takes away a little bit of the weight because it is a burden. Like I've got a lot of devotions. I belong to several
Yeah.
confraternities. I belong to the confraternity of Saint Peter, which is why I bought you a fancy shirt because I like the keys. But the confraternity of Saint Peter is connected to the FSSP, and we're praying for the priests and seminarians of the FSSP and of all priests and seminarians generally.
Right.
But I belong to several different confraternities, and it does, after a dozen or however many years it's been since my conversion, it does start to become mindless repetition, right? Unless you make a conscious effort to
Right.
keep it alive. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yeah. You always got to battle that. That's for sure.
Because it's just like, and I'm just like, I suck at multitasking. I cannot multitask. But the one place I can multitask is when I'm doing my prayers. It's like I can think of other things. It's the only time. It's the only time I can multitask.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. And then I tell myself, hey David, you should listen to yourself because this is really interesting. This is good stuff that you're praying. Like tune in. You know what I mean? Tune in. This is good stuff. Listen, it's good. It's amazing. The mind, we're so weak. Our intellects are weak. No, our intellects are dim and our wills are weak, right?
Yeah, that is often the case.
That's all you're gonna say? You're not gonna give us an anecdote about your own weaknesses? Come on.
For me, it's I have this weird tendency to anytime I'm not actively mentally engaged in something to get drowsy and fall asleep. Now, I've heard that that it can be an indication of ADD, not the hyperactive side of it, but yeah, if I'm not actively mentally engaged, I will doze off. So and maybe this is partly due to me procrastinating to say my rosary until the end of the day, but I do often have a hard time staying awake throughout it, unfortunately.
My few listeners that I do have, they probably get sick of hearing me repeat this, but I love talking about the Decalogue and the Rosary. I have an episode you can watch if you're interested in my rosary.
Okay.
I made my own rosary because one of my favorite saints is Saint Louis de Montfort.
Okay.
Louis
Yep.
Marie de Montfort. And he said, make your own method, right? So I made my own method using the Decalogue. So for the 10 Hail Marys, I have one of the 10 commandments for each one, right?
Okay.
So it's very, very powerful. I love the 10 commandments, and it does help. It does help focus your attention. And
Mhm.
another thing that stimulates me during my rosary is the mystical dimension where we are temporal creatures. We're stuck in time. So it's right now it's Friday night at 2023 or whatever. But God's not stuck in time, and
Right.
the saints are not stuck in time up in heaven, and the ones in purgatory, I'm not sure what's happening there, but um, that's a question we'll get to maybe.
Okay.
I want to talk about purgatory, but the mystical dimension of the rosary is to actually, just like the mass, just like the Eucharist, the consecration of the Eucharist, it's a mystical atemporal thing where it's a representation of the reality of 2000 years plus
Right.
years ago. So with the
Yep.
rosary, it's the same thing. I want to be there in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's one of my favorites, by the way. The Garden of Gethsemane.
Yes.
That's one of my absolute favorites. Why? Because it's very calm. It's sad, but it's peaceful and it's intimate. I could be there with
Hmm.
Christ. It's very intimate. So I love to transport myself there, but there's another part of it. I also love to transport Jesus Christ from his passion and being tortured and crucified. I love to bring him mystically to 2023 into my silly, boring little world. So during my rosary, I give him a break from the pains and sufferings. And it's like a mystical timeshare where it's like, if I'm paying attention during my rosary, that's quality time for Jesus Christ to get away and to give him, just to comfort him. I don't know if this is Catholic or not. This is just what my intuition has led me to do, but you can comment now.
No, I think in the School of Jesus Crucified, the Father Ignatius of the Side of Jesus talks a lot about compassionating our Lord in his passion. That when you're meditating on the passion, a lot of that meditation should be you is about compassionating him during his sufferings. Shedding tears for him, but being there to comfort him. Obviously we're not there physically or temporarily, but like you said, it's God and Jesus is outside of time, and the passion and the crucifixion. I mean, that those events are the very axis of the history of the world, of creation. So if there's any moment where we can be present outside of ourselves, that has to be it, I imagine.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. Very powerful stuff. So we mentioned briefly purgatory, and a guest asked me recently about time, or maybe someone in the live chat asked about time and purgatory, and I said, well, there's no time, because when you're in purgatory, you're out of time. Like, time's up. That's why you can't
Right.
merit anything for yourself in purgatory. So you're in eternity, but you're not quite in heaven. So and then there's this idea of like, it's like, well, you're on your way to heaven, you're guaranteed to get to heaven, but not yet. So it seems like a temporal thing. And it's not something that I'm going to worry about. And I'm not reaching beyond my ken and to like, I have to know. No, but I'm curious what you
Right.
think. I'm curious what you think, because maybe there's a simple sort of analogy that you could give me where it would sort of help me to explain it to people when they ask me.
So I mean, we are told that we're fulfilling our temporal punishment for our sin. Now, does that mean it happens within time? No, like you, I don't think so, because you are outside of time. You're outside of your physical body, obviously. Um, I think it very well could have a temporal element in that whatever it is that is purifying us, maybe we experience it temporarily, but I think it's part of Eastern, and by Eastern I mean Eastern Catholic spirituality, is that they don't see purgatory necessarily as a temporal place, with time. They see it as an experience of purgation, right? And that experience, maybe there is a temporal element to it, but it's not necessarily a place you go to experience punishment before going to heaven. You know, it might happen, say, within a single instant, temporarily within the universe, but it could be an experience of purgation that maybe seems like a longer period of time to you. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, if you read the saints that have gone to purgatory, it certainly seems long.
Yeah, right.
Right? Right? It's like
Yeah,
hellish long for 5 minutes in purgatory.
yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that confuses especially modern Catholics, but when you see old prayer books, they'll often, for any indulgence prayer,
Mm.
um, it will give, say 5 days indulgence, 7 days indulgence, for the partial indulgences. Nowadays, partial indulgences don't have those delimiters, and I'm not really a fan of that being taken away. But I think people got confused that it meant you were getting 7 days off of purgatory, you know. But what really it's saying is that prayer is being given indulgence of worth 7 days of fasting and penance here
Yeah.
on earth.
Yeah. 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 I often I enjoy when I read, a little quote by a saint. Many saints have commented on this, where they'll
Hmm.
say, one little thing done with love is worth, 1,000 rosaries or whatever. They make these little
Yeah, yeah.
comments,
Like
offhand
one
comments.
tear shed at the passion is worth. I
Yeah.
forget what that quote is, but yeah, I know what you
And
mean.
we know this is not something like, oh well, I'm going to do an accounting now. The saint said
Yeah.
this and that, and then we're not going to do the accounting, right? But there's a
As an
tendency.
accountant, I am I do have a tendency to try to do that.
It's a
I have my
tendency we
spreadsheet
have.
open.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we can say, oh, I found a contradiction. This said saying that, but that said this and this. It doesn't add up. Well, it's not supposed to add up. It's just
No.
it's a sentiment.
Yeah.
We're expressing, like, I mean,
We're
it's like
we're tr- we're using our human intellect to express something that is so far outside of our ability.
well, not only that, but it's the foolishness of love. Like, it's like the
Mm,
foolishness of love. And when you look as a cold, heartless observer into the little chitter chatter, whispering in the pillow talk between husband and wife,
mm,
and
yeah.
you're gonna do an analysis like this, you're gonna say this makes no sense. Like, here's the transcript of what they said to each other, and therefore they're both insane. It doesn't make sense. The love talk, right? The little
Yeah.
names, the little code words, and all this sort of stuff. That's what it's like it's a romance. I always come back to this with religion. It's a romance. It's a romance, and it's a romantic thing, and it's falling in love, and we are
Hmm.
the bride and God is the bridegroom. And this is another thing with the whole sexual revolution and LGBTQ and all this nonsense. It's depriving us, it's muddying the waters around the explicit Catholic teaching that we are feminine, we are receptive, we are the bride. Our role is passive and receptive with respect to God. God is pure act. There's no potential in God. So it's muddying those waters, all of this demonic talk about gender and he, she, and they, them, and all that.
Definitely.
So we need to understand what's happening mystically. What's happening is that we are given an opportunity in this fallen world to kindle our love for our Creator, who's all good and deserving of
Hmm.
all our love, and if we're too distracted with a bunch of nonsense and politics and whatever, we're gonna miss out, right?
Hmm. And you'll end up in a place where you have no love for anyone or anything, and that's what scares me about hell more than anything. Is a thought that if you're there, you don't even love the people that you loved in life. And
Yeah,
that there's something about that is terrifying somehow.
yeah. Think about it. What do people like when you talk to an atheist, for example, today, and you just listen to them talk about, let's say they're boasting about their trip to Italy or something like that, and they had a nice cappuccino by the sea and a beautiful lady walked by, whatever. It's like, okay, so there's the pleasure, there's the visual stimulus, there's the tasty food and the
Hmm.
wine and the dancing and the sex and all the things they indulge in. All these things are very good, but in hell, they're going to hate all of that. They're going to hate
Yeah.
all of that. the most pleasurable moments will be the most painful reminders of how they missed the boat.
Yeah, yeah, and for people who all they talk about is loving others, we got to find some way to get through to them about that.
I don't watch Catholic media. I told Anthony this because it's too depressing. All the Pope bashing and all the bad news, and hey, but wait, there's more bad news. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something new every day. That yeah,
So I don't really watch it. I just avoid Catholic media, and I do the podcast, to have conversations with people about the topics that I care about, faith and philosophy, and to hear
yep.
people's inspirational stories and to learn how to be a better Catholic and stuff like that. But I don't. So I don't watch shows. So I don't really watch your show either. I got your shirt though. But are you planning on, or have you had guests of different faiths, or atheists, or agnostics, or Protestants, Orthodox, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists? Have you had guests like that, or do you want to start having guests like that? It seems to be bugging here. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah. Hello, hello, hello. Let's see. Are you back? You were bugging out
I
there.
think so.
You
Yeah,
back?
I can hear and see you.
Is it something I said?
No, no. Being in the woods of northern Minnesota, the internet can be a
I
little
hadn't
iffy.
thought about that. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So some people in live chat are saying I bored you, so you fell asleep. They didn't say that really.
That's funny.
Ah,
um, but no. So up to this point, we've had one Orthodox gentleman on for one of our trivia episodes, and that was fun. In the next few weeks, we are planning on having um, one of our viewers on actually who has fallen away from the faith. He was raised Catholic, raised in the FSSP actually,
oh,
as a very traditional Catholic. I want to say he's in his early to mid 20s now, but he's fallen away and is. I don't know if he would call himself an atheist, but he's definitely agnostic.
are you talking about Kevin
Kevin, yeah,
non trad cat? Cool,
yeah.
cool
So
guy,
we
cool
hope,
guy, very cool guy.
yeah, he definitely seems to be. So we hope to have him on in the next month or so.
Yeah, he's a sweetheart. He's very, 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 very wrong about metaphysics. Sorry, sorry, Kevin. Sorry. But that's just the way it is. That's just, that's why I love the Catholic Church, because we have everything. We got the music, we got the art, we got the culture, we got the hospitals, we got the schools, we got everything, and the philosophy and the theology and the saints, and it's
Yeah,
amazing. It's amazing. The heritage and the richness we have. It's
you
amazing.
can you can go down whatever path you want in the church, and that's because we're truly universal.
Yeah. Yeah. So a friend of mine, a guest of mine, he's some sort of Protestant, and I feel
Okay,
I feel bad even using that word, because I've come to learn that a lot of Protestants don't like to be called Protestants,
right, yeah,
which I find
right,
funny, but anyway.
yeah,
But I do
I
feel
agree.
guilty. I do feel guilty using the word, but it's a handy word. It's a handy word.
Yeah,
Non-Catholic Christian is just cumbersome.
yeah, right, and yeah, you either say non-Catholic or non-Catholic, non-Orthodox, or
Yeah.
non-apostolic.
Yeah.
Protestant is just way easier.
It's just easy. No offense is intended, But my one friend and guest, he's kind of curious. He's been watching a lot of my content,
Hmm.
and I'm all about the church and the authority and the Pope and stuff like that. And I want to talk to you about Pope Francis and Vatican II too. We'll get
Yeah.
back to that. But the basic idea, he came at me in an email or on Twitter or something, and he said, you know, David, I've been watching a lot of your videos, and you seem really, really convinced that the Catholic Church is the church that Christ built. Why is that? You know, so you know, I've made a lot of videos about that, but I'm just trying to think, like, what works? Like, what do Protestants hear on that subject where they go, ah, okay, I get it. Yeah, it's the Catholic Church. Like, I mean, I don't know what to say, because I've said it all. Like, I've talked about the
Right.
authority, I've talked about the canon of Scripture, I've talked about you know, all the reasons why I'm Catholic, but they don't get it. They can't grab a hold of it. So what could they grab a hold of it? Does it need to be simpler, more intuitive? Does it need to be less intellectual? What do they need, do you think?
I I think obviously it's going to depend on the person.
Is it grace? Is it just grace? Is that the key? Is the key grace, and God is hardening their hearts until the full number come in, type of thing?
I think it could be. I think that could be the case, but I think sometimes we can make it too complicated, right? For me, like, I could spend hours explaining why I believe the church to be of divine origin. But when it comes down to it, I I keep getting drawn back to the quote by Belloc, where he says that he holds the church to be divine because no merely human institution conducted with such knavish imbecility would have lasted a fortnight. And at first it just kind of sounds like maybe a witty quote, right? But I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like, what other human institution do we know that has lasted 2,000 years? And you have other apostolic churches that are still exist, but I mean, you've also seen that they've shattered, and actually seem to be shattering at a faster pace. Now, obviously, the Catholic Church itself at the moment doesn't necessarily seem to be the most stable, with things happening in Germany and such, but compared to everything else out there, it's worlds better. So I just think you can appeal to. It's going to depend on the person what you have to appeal to, but yeah, I think in the end it probably does come down to grace and just having to pray for people for their eyes to be opened.
Yeah. Another thing I get is this sort of complaint that, you know, we're so exclusive. You have to be Catholic to go to heaven, and I do say that you have to be. You know, obviously, there are no non-Catholics in heaven. Give me a break. I mean, give me a
Yes.
break. You know, we're not going to be up there with different opinions. You know?
Yeah. And to be fair, there's no non-Catholics in hell either. Everyone down there believes it now too. They hate it, but they believe it.
It's only in the church militant where we have a diversity of cult and all these sorts of things, right? But you know, there's an image from Vatican II, and it also appears in this lovely little introductory textbook on the dogmas.
I love Ott.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
It's also in there, but it's in Vatican II in different language. But Ott puts it very succinctly when he talks about three kinds of Christians. Because Vatican II talks about the Church of Christ subsisting in the Catholic Church, and the Sedevacantists have a love-hate relationship with that. They love to hate that word subsists in. Yeah. So I did a bit of research and I found out what it means. What it basically means is that the Church of Christ, there are three classes of Christian. There are those who have the faith and are in the state of grace, like when you waltz out of the confession booth. Those who have the faith but are not in the state of grace, like just before you went in the confession booth, possibly. You might not have been in the state of mortal sin. I often go just with venial sin. But people that are not in the state of grace but have the faith. And then there are those that don't even have the faith. But they're Christian. They're part of the Christian church. Why? Mm-hmm. Because they're what we call potential Christians. Why do we call them potential Christians? Because they're not in the fourth category, which are the non-Christians, which are those what we call the reprobate, or those who are going to end up in hell. I don't say that they're destined for hell, although there is a predestination. There's a certain type of predestination also, but I want to be very delicate with my language because I don't want to be Calvinist about it. But and we're not. but there is a certain predestination. But those who end up in hell by their own choice and whatever, by the will of God, the permissive will and the positive ordaining will,
Yeah.
in some mysterious way, those people that end up in hell, they're not part of the church. They're not potential members, but everyone else is at least a potential member. So that gives me a lot of hope, and it removes the tendency where I would want to look down my nose and judge anyone, because Catholic charity, Christian charity forbids me. I'm not allowed to assume that you, for example, or this other guy or this other girl or whatever is destined for hell. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm never allowed to do that. So what's the alternative? If I'm not allowed to say you're going to hell, it means you're Christian. You are a potential Christian. You're on your way. Congratulations. And let me help you to get closer and closer to having the fullness of the faith and getting into the state of grace. And then the rest is history, right? It's a pretty exciting model. And I get it from Vatican II and from Ott.
So, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that, say someone is they don't have the faith or necessarily the grace. You're saying that they may or may not be a potential Christian. You're not. They may or may not be predestined.
Yeah, but I'm not
for hell.
allowed.
But because we're not allowed to assume, we have to
give the benefit of the
have
doubt.
to assume, right?
Give the benefit of the doubt, right?
Yeah.
So we know full well when you look at some creepy, evil character in the history books. For example, Judas. When we look at Judas, it's really pushing. It's the edge case, right? It's the edge case.
If there was one case he would be it, but
Yeah, even there I hesitate. And in the gospel accounts, there is some indication that he repented. In one of the versions of the story, he goes and he doesn't hang himself. Do you remember that version of the story where he? No, you don't remember that? Anyway, maybe I just imagined it, but I'll have to go back and read. But yeah, I still have like a non-zero amount of hope, but it's a vanishingly small amount of hope for him. And I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. This is God's will that hell is real. There are people in hell, and the saints say that it's very well populated. So I think he's frozen again. Let me know if you can hear me, Rob.
Yeah.
We'll let it buffer back.
At all?
It slowly seems to be coming back. To be coming back. Is that you in my live chat that says avoiding Babylon?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, okay. So you could hear me.
Staring contest.
Very cool. So in terms of the populations of heaven and hell, it's like I just don't even go there. But I do tend to side with the saints who seem to be of the strong opinion that it's the narrow path and the few are saved and this sort of thing. It's scary. It's scary to think about it.
If you ever want to be scared straight, St. Leonard of Port Maurice, his homily on the subject will do it.
Okay. I'll look that up. Yeah.
If you've never read it or heard it, he goes through more or less like the likelihood of being saved and the numbers of those who aren't, and it's definitely it will convict you to go to confession. I almost guarantee it.
Yeah, well, that's what we need, right? That's what we need. I often think about, this is a very dark topic, and I hope you're comfortable dwelling on it a little bit longer. I often think about it when I see someone who's charming and good looking and they smell good and they're successful and they have money and everyone loves them and blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very, very tempting to just assume like this person's going to heaven, like they're so good. They're so good. All that superficial stuff. It just looks good, right? They talk well, they're educated, everything. But and they're smiling and whatever. But I do meditate on that person could be going to hell. In spite of all the trappings, in spite of all that, the pomp, right?
maybe it's my my own personal skepticism or cynicism, um, or maybe it's just how demonically inverted the world seems to be these days. But I'm at the point where presented with someone like you just described, my natural assumption, and it's obviously not a good assumption to have, is that that person is maybe doomed for hell for some reason, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know. Like I said, maybe it's just the cynicism I have with the state of our world today. But
I understand that tendency. For sure, it's easy to be cynical in that way, and it's easy to think the worst of people. And we know that same person that I just described in glowing terms. We also know that they're pro-abortion, they're
right,
pro-LGBTQ, they're pro. It's like it's not a secret. It's not a secret.
right,
They're bragging about it. They're having parades about it. Okay, it's not a secret. So, yeah, there are plenty of indications there's objective evil here. There's objective
yeah,
evil, and they're in danger, right? But what I'm talking about is just the goodness. I'm talking about like God created this beautiful creature who is
yes,
charming, very charming and
yep,
beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. So that's
yep,
seductive. That is seductive. And I guess basically I'm describing the whole Hollywood thing, and whatever these online people do,
yeah.
myself not included. Thank God I'm a dorky, awkward loser.
That being someone like that tends to be more fun and edifying, right?
Well, I mean, there was an episode on Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David notices, what was it? I think he noticed this professional salesman guy. He didn't really like him. But then, he's a good looking salesman, had all the right talk and everything like that. But then he met the guy's wife, the salesman's wife, and she
Hmm.
was very homely and ugly. And he's like, wow, this guy is a good guy. This guy, he's, he's, he's a good guy. Look how ugly his wife is. You know what I mean? So he suddenly gained respect for this guy. Like, he must be a good guy, right? You know what I mean? So there's that sort of counterpoint. But I guess I'm more worried about my own soul, my own salvation, to start trying to figure out if Woody Allen's going to go to heaven or not, or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. It's something I always have to fight to concentrate on my own salvation and that of my family instead of concerning myself with others. Not that obviously we need to be concerned about the souls of our brothers and sisters, but not to the point where we're making assumptions or uh, or being uncharitable.
Yeah, well, Saint Augustine had a poster allegedly in his office on his wall that said, "Here we speak ill of no one." Okay, it
Mm,
sounded very much like a Pope Francis sort of poster. And then there's that idea I've read in many of the lives of the saints where they said to never consider yourself superior to anyone. 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 That's a very humbling thought. And I practice that one. I do practice that one. And so there's that little loophole where I'm allowed to feel superior, and I do often feel superior. That's okay. That's just a
mhm.
feeling. But don't pay
Right.
attention to the feeling, and don't give, any credence to the feeling. Go with your
Because
knowledge.
as soon as you act on it with your will, it does become sinful.
Yeah.
It's natural to have, but yeah, you do have to ignore it and fight against it.
So, very briefly, because I've taken an hour of your time already, how do you feel? You haven't really given me much feedback about Vatican II and Pope Francis. Those are two hot button issues. People get really, really, really excited about those two topics. I love both.
Yeah.
I love both. I think both are Catholic and holy. So, what do you say?
I I think in the end, I'm a layman, a father with children, and a lot of those issues are so far above my pay grade that I just have to trust the church when it comes to them. Not to say that maybe that the documents of Vatican II are perfect, because in the end they are documents made by humans, so they are not necessarily capable of being perfect. Infallibility is a negative charism, so it protects it from, maybe including positive error, but it doesn't mean that they're perfect documents. So I trust that there's nothing in them that is a positive heresy or anything like that. I acknowledge there definitely could be ambiguity, or they could have been done better. I don't think there's anyone who would necessarily say that they're perfect, but at the same time, I look at the history of the church, and there's, after every council, been some sort of period of
Turmoil.
upheaval after it, of turmoil, of questions that usually end up are resolved by the next council or the council after that even. So I think maybe the upheaval and turmoil now are maybe worse than it's been in the past, but I think that's exacerbated by just modernity and just the errors of the modern world. So in the end, I try not to concern myself with the controversy around it too much, and I just try to live my life as Catholic as I know how.
Yeah, I know that's your mandate with the Avoiding Babylon podcast, to not do what everyone's cashing in on. Everyone's cashing in on the controversy. I admire you for that. I really do admire you for that. You do know that it was the most populous council, like in terms of bishop count, head count of bishops.
5,000 some, right?
So the contributing voices for the documents, can you imagine sitting down with a couple thousand of your closest friends and trying to agree on a paragraph?
Well, I mean, I remember group projects from school. They never went well.
Nothing good comes out of a committee. But it is an ecumenical council, and Pope Francis is the Pope. And if anyone thinks that anyone that's claiming to be Catholic thinks that Pope Francis is not Pope, just show me where the Church teaches that Pope Francis is not the Pope, and I'll join the Church. I'll go with the Church. But right now, when I go to Mass, they pray for the Holy Father, the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, and they call him Francis. Yeah. Right? It's like,
and there's a lot of back and forth on what saints say what about the issues of
heresy,
of the papacy, heresy in the papacy, error in the papacy, right? But the consensus does seem to be more or less that even if the Pope were to not be the Pope or were to be a heretic, it's certainly not on me as a layman to make any sort of determination or distinction or declaration about that. So I just need
Paul to St. Peter, St. Paul corrected St. Peter.
Well, I know I'm not St. Paul or St. Peter, so I'm going to stay in my lane and get myself and my kids to heaven.
Amazing. So I have to let you go. I hear my wife whistling to me there, but she's going to have a baby any minute. I'm kidding. But it's been a pleasure. This time has like zipped by, and
it has.
You're a joy to behold. And I hope you come back. I hope you and Anthony will both come back separately.
Okay.
Separately, because I can't multitask unless I'm praying. But I hope you come back and just chat some more, and it would be fun. And if you guys want to have me on a trivia show, I suck at trivia. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast, much less like whatever you're gonna ask, but I suck.
It's okay. The point isn't the trivia. The point is the
banter,
the fraternity, the banter.
Okay. Excellent. So before we wrap up, anything you wanted to squeeze in, any last thoughts, any little thing that you thought you'd get to mention that you just forgot to mention while we were chatting, or is that it?
I don't think so. Other than, anyone watching, please pray that that my wife delivers our little daughter here healthy and well in the next few days, and I'd really appreciate that.
Of course. Yeah, and I don't know if Anthony told you, but I enroll each and every one of my guests in a perpetual mass. So you and your family are going to be receiving some extra graces until the end of time, right? Even if you end up in purgatory, you're going to get those extra graces of the mass. Because
that's amazing. Thank you so much.
So that's another Catholic life hack. I learned that from an old guy here in Montreal. So
Yep.
please remember me and mine in your precious prayers. I would
I will
really
do so.
appreciate that. That's another reason I do the podcast, is to get people to pray for me. And
Yep.
remember me in my prayers. And God bless you, and give my love to your wife. Okay.
I'll do that. Thank you, sir.
I'll be praying for you. God bless.
Thank you. You too.
Take good care.
Goodbye.
Bye.